Welcome to the program. For the past year, NATO has been dealing with an unprecedented split between the US and other members of the alliance. President Donald Trump has repeatedly threatened the sovereignty of two founding members of NATO, Denmark and Canada, and he's lashed out at NATO countries for refusing his calls to help reopen the Strait of Hormuz during the US and Israeli strikes on Iran. In a fresh blow to the Atlantic alliance, Trump has announced the withdrawal of 5,000 American soldiers from Germany. Well, my guest today is Marcos Perestrello, the president of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, a body that brings together legislators from NATO member countries. Marcos Perestrello is a former Secretary of State for National Defence in the Portuguese government, and he joins me from Lisbon. Welcome to Talking Europe.
Hello, Herman. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
You've just come back from the United States, and of course you talk to legislators and lawmakers there. What's their mood about NATO's future? Is it as dark as the mood among parliamentarians on this side of the Atlantic?
Well, what I can say about the mood that I found at the U.S. Congress and Senate was a strong support for the strengthening of the transatlantic bond. The transatlantic alliance has a strong support, both in the House and in the Senate of the U.S., as it has in the European Parliament. The point is that both them at the U.S. and here at the European Parliament believe that European countries and also Canada need to do a lot more on the development of our defense capabilities. We all agree on that.
Yeah.
And despite the political rhetoric that some administrations have on both sides of the Atlantic, but initially ignited by the rhetoric of the President of the United States, Donald Trump, what I would say is that that rhetoric is different from the action of all governments.
But it's
on
not
the same
just,
week.
Yes,
Yes.
Sorry, Marcus, because it's not only rhetoric, is it? I mentioned the withdrawal of 5,000 U.S. troops from Germany. That's a major move, which has been commented on in Europe as weakening not just German but also European deterrence. Don't you think?
I would say that if that happened, that would be the first significant political action that is not on the positive sense of the strengthening of the alliance. Even though there is a clear stance on the European side that Europe needs to be able to reinforce its capabilities on defense and being able to assure bigger autonomy regarding the United States of America in a way to be able to respond and be responsible for at least the conventional defense of the continent.
Yeah.
But that we know with the current levels of investment, and even though the investment is growing from year to year, that will take at least 5 years. So I would say that if that withdrawal happens, it's not positive. But we need to stick to the if.
But I'm just curious, do you think anyone in NATO on this side of the Atlantic really believes that Article 5, the Mutual Defense Clause, is still actually, that it still means anything, that Donald Trump would actually defend NATO? I mean, things have changed very dramatically, haven't they?
I think things have changed a bit. We live the most unpredictable and dangerous and volatile security environment all over. The U.S. are now engaged in a demanding operation in Iran, and we cannot lose sight of our priorities regarding European security. And our priorities regarding European security now are in Ukraine. and on the support that we all need to give to Ukraine. If there was, which I do not believe, a Russian operation, and they would evoke Article 5, I'm sure that many allies would respond.
Let's go back to defense spending, because obviously you've alluded to this a couple of times. And according to the CIPRI military expenditure database, European NATO spending grew by 14% in 2025 to 734 billion euros. That's actually the highest that CIPRI has ever recorded for Europe. Marcos Perestrello, when it comes to defense spending targets, the NATO summit in Ankara in July is going to be quite important, isn't it?
I would say, I would expect that in Ankara it will be more about execution of the spending, and not so much about goals. The objectives, the targets are established. Now we need to settle and evaluate how this defense spending is increasing, how is putting in effect, and that is the major and central role that need to be discussed in Ankara. We passed.
So how to reach
the targets.
In other words, how to reach the 5% of GDP spending on defense.
How it is the execution going, and evaluate how it is being done. The way is positive. Everybody is taking very everybody is assuming their responsibilities. All the countries are assuming their responsibilities with a notable force. Even Spain crossed the 2% last year. So this is the relevant data that we need to have in mind. And there's a role also among European leaders and among NATO leadership to call on the attention of the US administration that the commitments assumed are being accomplished. That's important that everybody knows that.
There's a lot of discussion on this side of the Atlantic, particularly where I am in France, about a distinct European pillar within NATO. Obviously, the French government is developing this idea, but the Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, seems to have really poured cold water on this idea. He calls a European pillar a bit of an empty word. And he also says if anyone thinks that the European Union or Europe as a whole can defend itself without the US, keep on dreaming. Do you agree? Are you with Mark Rutte or more with the French side of seeing things?
I would say that you need to build a European pillar inside NATO capable to contribute decisively to the defense of the Euro-Atlantic region. I think that's the point. It's not an empty pillar. It's a pillar built with European capabilities and European availability to assume responsibilities inside NATO. So I would say that you need to find the European pillar inside NATO, not outside. Because when the Secretary General says that we should dream on being able to defend the continent without the US, what he's saying is that would be much more expensive. Because if we get apart, we became weaker. If we work together, we became much stronger. Together, we were able to assure peace and safety in the Euro-Atlantic region for 80 years. In some troubling periods too, and with some problems inside the alliance too. And we were able to get to all those crises, and at the end of these 80 years of NATO, we are able to live in a continent, in a region where peace is the rule, where security is the rule, where safety is the rule. Well, so these successes that NATO achieved need to be on the table when we think of future solutions.
I take your point about past crises, but I can't remember a situation where the US was threatening to annex Greenland, which is part of a fellow NATO member state. I would say that it's an unfortunate political rhetoric, with internal political objectives that has nothing to do with the relation. But it's just rhetoric. But, Armen, if you allow me, you saw, as I saw, as everybody saw and heard, the speech of King Charles III to the U.S. Congress. It was a quite transatlantic speech. You saw the support it received by both chambers of Congress. You can imagine it's very hard to solve an alliance with this strength. With his strength. Just a very quick final point, if we could. You mentioned Ukraine earlier. Do you think NATO is doing enough to support efforts for a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, or is it basically a sort of fool's errand to try to achieve such a thing?
Frankly, I think we are not doing enough. What we are doing allows Ukraine to resist, allows Ukraine to inflict some damage in Russia, but it's not enough to put pressure in Russia to force them to sit at a table and negotiate seriously a ceasefire and a peace process. We need to do more on the military field, helping Ukraine, giving more equipment to Ukraine, and we need to do more on the economic area, putting more economic pressure on Russia to force them to sit and seriously have a conversation about ceasefire and about the peace process.
We'll leave it there. Thank you so much for being my guest. Marcos Perestrello, the President of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, joining me from Lisbon. Thank you very much. And that's all for this edition of Talking Europe.